Hello, everyone, and welcome to our artist talk for Footprints on Montague. I am Canon John Denaro, the rector of St. Anne and the Holy Trinity Church in Brooklyn Heights, where the exhibit is being shown. It is on display on the fence around the church. I'm thrilled about the exhibit and to be working with Hannah Tierney of FiveMyles and Claudia Draper at KODA are coming together to produce this exhibition. Is too long a story to tell, but it is, I think, just as it was meant to be after wondering how to give a place for artists' work at our church when our church was essentially closed down as the pandemic, as the pandemic hit in mid-March. Some of you watching may know that St. Anne and the Holy Trinity has been a kind of community commons and performance space for many, many years. It is where, if you're familiar with St. Anne's Warehouse started. I'm going to ask Claudia to let me share a couple of images for you. One is, well, here they both are. The one to, if you can see them both, I hope you can. Maybe I'll try not to do it this way. Sorry, this is not being very helpful. This one is an image of St. Anne and the Holy Trinity Church. Again, some of you may be very familiar with it, but I just thought you should see what an exquisite historic building is. It's a landmark on the corner of Clinton and Montague Streets in Brooklyn Heights. And this other shot is an interior shot. It's of some artists performing just this past fall, very small scale event that actually was a filming of some music we used for a fundraiser. And it is in this space that we have historically welcomed many people over long years. And in the last 8 years or so, where we've welcomed visual artists to display their work. And so this is what was not available to us for public art displays once the pandemic hit. Okay, Claudia, you can share your screen again. I'll stop sharing these. You can share yours if you wish. So I don't want to be too much longer, but I do just want to say that what it felt like this exhibit gave us the opportunity to do was to turn our exhibition space inside out, if you will, to bring the art to the outside where it could be engaged and where we could connect with people, as we hope to do with all the performances we host at the church. Many of them by outside groups who just love the space for performance. I'll add that as we began to wonder what to do, not just about worship, which was a big piece of our challenge, but also about the engagement with community beyond our members, we brought a pantry program as we wanted to address food insecurity in Brooklyn. We brought that out to the front entrance of the church and essentially outdoors. And we brought a concert series outdoors. And this great display of artist work from Brooklyn was an extension of that. And again, I'll just make the case for this being a way to connect with people. Our original thought was that we would connect with people around the issues that were heating up, not just the pandemic, but the calls for social justice and racial justice. And we thought it might be quite a political exhibit if it were to sort of become what had originally been in my head and in the mind of some of my members. Hannah Tierney, who I first met before I met Claudia, convinced me that what we needed to do was engage people and help them find another focus because the pandemic and a lot of the burning issues in society were not things they were had any limit. There were limits to us engaging, and I'm so grateful. I'll just conclude by saying how much it means to me to have collaborators like KODA and FiveMyles, and frankly all of the artists who are represented here. In today's artist talk, we have two of my favorites. I'm kidding. I like them all. But Anne and Tatiana, their work is especially meaningful, and I look forward to you enjoying a presentation by both of these wonderful artists. And I'll just say that someone we won't hear from, but who's represented in the exhibit, Madi Dangerously, whose poem is on one of our the banners in the exhibit, asked the question, "How am I living?" And I think that's a question that the whole exhibit asks us to ask ourselves as we continue to live into all sorts of new realities. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll turn this over to Claudia now.
I'm Hannah Tierney, and I run FiveMyles. And on August 16th, John wrote me an email asking if we could talk about a possible collaboration, putting artworks out onto this wonderful fence that surrounds the church. And we did meet, and the fence was obviously the right place to have art at a time when nobody could go inside. And well, then I did one of the smartest things I ever did. I asked Claudia if she wanted to collaborate with KODA on this. And really, Claudia has been incredible, keeping it together, getting it together. First, we checked out what kind of work we wanted people to see. And there are many drawings on that fence. There are the photographs, the birds. So it was a very good, plus the poet. So it was a very good mix. And once we had that together, Claudia pretty much took over and really did the work and got this going. And here we are now. And it's wonderful.
Thank you, Hannah. And thank you, John Denaro. It's an honor to be working with both of you. Thank you to St. Anne's Church for inviting us to collaborate. And yes, I mean, one beautiful summer day, Hannah said that she has the most fabulous project, as Hannah often says, and it's just impossible to say no to that. And I'm very grateful, and the whole team at KODA is as well, for joining on this journey, and to be able to show artwork to people during the pandemic. And it's the facade of the building, the exterior is just incredibly beautiful, and it's been great to showcase art, and the exhibition is still up for the next 2 days. So just go and check it if you're around, and see how beautiful it looks in at different times of the day, and in different weather. I'm going to start introducing the first artist. We have 2 artists today speaking out of the 6 artists who are in exhibition. If you would like to learn more about the other artists in the exhibition, you can go to one of our websites, that Nadine, I think, will be sharing in the chat. And we will start today by a presentation by Anne Rosen, and it will be followed by a presentation by Tatiana Arocha. And at the end, we're going to have a Q&A, so you will be able to ask questions and interact with us a bit. Anne Rosen studied printmaking, photography, and alternative photographic processes, and graduated from SUNY at Buffalo with a BFA and the Visual Studies workshop with an MFA. Her work is community-based. She received grants from the Brooklyn Arts Council to develop her project in presence of family, and has published several books in connection with this project. In 2016, she received a grant from the Paffen Foundation to expand her work teaching digital photography to women living in shelter. We're going to learn more about 2 projects by Anne, and we'll start with Being Seen. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you, Claudia. Being Seen is a project that I began in 2012. Could you go to the next slide? Washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to be neutral. Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. This is one of the women, and her name, this is not her real name. I need to protect the women. Josephine. The public perception of homelessness is fraught with negative images and stereotypes that can be said to constitute a total stigma for people who are without homes. Living under these conditions has been unidentifiable living under these conditions has unidentifiable consequences for their health and well-being. And left is Terry, right is Desiree. Women who are living without shelter represent a growing portion of the homeless population in the United States. Of the approximately 3.5 million people who are homeless, 1/3 are women. Tamara. Homeless women suffer from an array of health and social problems, and these are exacerbated by multiple layers of social stigma related to substance abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, and perpetual poverty. Jill. Being Seen, Women Living in Shelter grows out of my concern for this crisis of homelessness among economically disadvantaged women and its relationship to mental illness and drug abuse. As a professional photographer, I have been photographing and teaching digital photography to women in shelters since 2012. And the following is a short video from my recent installation of Being Seen in the Project Plus space at FiveMyles Gallery.
I was residing in a women's shelter because I refused to live with my family and got tired of house hopping. I have been in the system since I was 2. I went from foster care to the Job Corps and then to a shelter. I moved from one shelter to another, telling myself the same thing. I can't stay here.
When I was young, I was taken away from my mother, who was on drugs and alcohol and put in foster care. At 13, I was back with my mother. I moved out when I was 19, got my GED, and went back to New York. I had 2 children in my 20s whom I tried to raise by myself for 4 years. New York State took them away 11 years ago to live with my sister, and I haven't seen them since. I tried to take it one day at a time.
I'm part Native American. My mom used to drink. My father was always working. When I was 17, I was arrested for the second time. They gave me the choice of going to jail or into the Navy. Joining the Navy was the only choice. I got to travel the world until I got severely hurt. Then I was in many VA hospitals. Now I can walk and move as I did before. I'm getting back on my feet.
For several years, I kept drinking and driving, getting arrested, and never doing jail time. Finally, when I was arrested twice in 1 year for DWIs, I was put in jail. When I was released, I continued to drink, went back to jail, and was sent to rehab. This went on until I was sent to an inpatient program. Then I went to a halfway house. At the halfway house, I started applying to various schools and was accepted to a cosmetology school. I was allowed to move back home after a year. I'm still sober, attending school, and starting a new job. At 31 years old, I'm finally starting my life.
I never thought that I would be homeless until I was. My childhood was riddled with abuse, neglect, and growing up too fast. My mental health got pretty bad in my teenage years. My last year of high school, I was kicked out of the house. And so I spent time in and out of the youth shelter until I aged out.
117 days I stayed asleep, eating through a tube. Still, to this day, the doctors don't know how and why I gained consciousness. Unable to walk or speak, with no motor skills, I began my road to recovery. Today, I only suffer seizures. I am here. I am me.
And then the pandemic hit. Claudia, you can go to the installation shot. Thank you. I was stopped in my tracks. I could no longer visit the shelters and community recreation rooms where I'd been teaching and photographing. I needed to do something totally different and felt that my digital camera didn't capture the drastic change that was occurring to the world. So I pulled out my 1969 Rolleiflex camera and started shooting with black and white film, something I hadn't done for 15 years. Using an old close-up lens, I discovered I could shoot images of people safely without masks because I didn't have to get too close. I took pictures of those who surrounded me, my husband, my sons, neighbors, a few dance pals. I asked everyone I photographed to respond to this question: what do you think of this pandemic world? The responses ranged from despair over the loss of a loved one, to anger over police brutality, to how life was slower and more soulful. The following images and statements are from this project. This shot is of the footprints on Montague exhibition at the St. Anne's Church. Connie. This pandemic crushed the world as we knew it, crushed the world we loved and where we could commingle with loved ones, crushed the world we existed in with relative peace of mind, crushed the world where we roam freely and unencumbered. But it has allowed me and many others to relax more, appreciate the little things more, enjoy home and family, take up new adventures and breathe. And my heart breaks for those and their loved ones that no longer exist among us because of this pandemic world. Muata. Global capitalism is a multi-headed snake that links class, race, and gender. We need a total worldwide systemic change, one that puts humanity front and center. Until this happens, we will have more pandemics in the future. Anthea. The first 2.5 months of the pandemic, I couldn't sleep enough, smoke enough to calm my nerves. Then George Floyd was murdered by the knee of a policeman as other officers stood by letting it happen. I've been awake ever since. Am I scared of the Rona? Yes, but I'm more afraid to be Black in America. Never before have I been more aware of my skin color and the consequences that it has for me. The fact that I use the word consequence is just the beginning of my anger and sadness in this world. Deandra. This pandemic world is a wake-up call for all. It highlights the disparity between the haves and the have-nots. Ninita. The pandemic has affected every aspect of life. From my job, worrying about the effect of the virus on the full-term and premature babies I take care of, to being worried about getting infected by this illness. It doesn't matter where you work or who you are or what job you do, because it can affect anybody without warning. I worried about my elderly mom in the Philippines who was infected with the virus. Because of travel restrictions, I haven't been able to visit her this year. Luckily, she survived. I worry about my children's safety and my husband's, who is also a healthcare worker. Still, nursing is the most rewarding profession for me, even with all the risks to healthcare workers taking care of patients with COVID. Doran, in my opinion, I think this pandemic has brought the world to its knees, and it is sad to say that even 9 to 10 months in, no one knows anything, and still seems we are in uncharted waters. Also, leaders worldwide use it to their political advantage. Say one thing and do another. Rules for thee, but not for me. It's just sad. Kathleen. This pandemic allows me to be more with myself. It was an eye-opener on so many levels, from my finances to my mental and spiritual health. Everything. I even realized I'm still not where I want to be in life. This year has taken a toll on everyone. This year has taken a toll on every last one of us. Barrett. Being originally from New York City, it might seem that no calamity can faze me. For this pandemic, together with my country's stunning lack of coherence, consider me quite fazed. Kyle. After living in this new world for almost a year now, I have grown used to the isolation it has forced on me. I wish that I could go out and make friends again, go on adventures without the fear of catching a virus potentially dangerous to the loved ones I keep near. Not that I ever went out a lot, but I would rather have the option than not at all. It scares me how many people have not taken this seriously, and how a virus that doesn't care at all about anything but killing us became so politicized. All I can hope is our leaders move in a better direction. And this is my last slide. Max. As a high school teacher, I've seen how the pandemic has heightened many tensions and conflicts. Most of the issues aren't new, but have taken on new prominence during this crisis. It has forced us as a society to confront the role of schools and what learning looks like in them. Along the way, it has laid bare the true priorities of government officials and school administrators, many of whom seem more focused on warehousing kids than true safety or learning.
Thank you very much, Anne, for sharing stories of women in shelters being seen, and the pandemic diary of your friends and family. I would like to introduce now Tatiana Arocha, who is a visual artist from Bogota, Colombia, based in Brooklyn, New York. She grew up in the midst of nature, camping since childhood with her family across the diverse ecological regions of Colombia. Her art practice involves creating layered detail, graphic compositions, and application of digital techniques learned in her earlier professional career as a graphic designer and illustrator. She has exhibited in the US, UK, Italy, and Colombia, which shows at Sugar Hill Children's Museum for Arts and Storytelling, and we'll see a video of that. Queens Botanical Gardens, Wave Hill, and Brick, amongst others. You're going to see a very different artists working in a way that's not photography at all. But both artists do care deeply about justice in various forms. Tatiana, the floor is yours after the video.
Todo esto está lleno de mensajes. Yo creo que los árboles le hablan a uno. Pues me están diciendo que están felices. Me están diciendo que están agradecidos de que nosotros los queramos.
Well, first of all, thank you so much to KODA, to FiveMyles, and to Sanance to inviting me to be part of this exhibition. It's been really exciting to have the birds come out again. I will go deeper into talking about that project, which is a project that I love very much because it's the moment in which I decided to focus fully on my practice as a visual artist. But for now, I'm going to do a little bit of explanation of kind of a little bit of like telling what my work is about. There's many layers, not only in conceptually as a work, but also in the process. The video that you saw, it's the video of the solo exhibition that is still up at the Sugar Hill Children's Museum for Art and Storytelling. It's in Harlem, and it's in Sugar Hill, and it was curated by Lauren Keeley and with the associated curator Cinzia Menengello, and it was a great experience to be able to have access to a space like the Sugar Hill, like the museum for this exhibition. The exhibition is called Respiro un Bosque. And that comes from this idea of what we breathe and of being in a city. And one of the things that I'm constantly dwelling from, it's just kind of how to be connected to the land and to how to connect to the land where we're at. And I'm I grew up being able to have the opportunity to be in Colombia and to have access to incredible biodiversity and places that feel very abstract to many people outside of Colombia. And for us as Colombians, they're sort of our identity. So by being here in the States and finding out that one of the things that Colombia has always been seen as has been by the purity of its cocaine and drug dealers, and the violence and being kidnapped was a very kind of harsh reality. Because although there's all those complexities in the country has an extreme wealth in terms of wealth for environmental wealth and knowledge, wealth of knowledge. So when I started my process of doing my work, I first started by collecting photos that, out of my studio, collecting photographs and imagery. And I started working by a series of botanical drawings that were done with a botanical expedition in the 1800s. I was starting to see how colonization had affected and had started to, was those beginnings of the impact on the land and the impact on the knowledge of the people that lived in that land. And I slowly, when I started just focusing more on my practice, I started realizing that I needed to just kind of get out of the studio and be able to go to the places that I was talking about and describing in my pieces. And I started, the image that you see in the screen is one of the processes, it's the process that I started. The pictures and photos that are here were made last year. Every time that I go at my dad's house, who's the person that is speaking in the video. And one of the things that I've been doing is trying to connect to how am I connected to the land. And a lot of that has been through my dad. So I go through a process of photographing, creating textures, collecting plants. And it's a process that I've been calling weaving, where I'm weaving myself into the land, where I'm starting to recognize what is there and I'm connecting myself. Quite if you want to move, change slide. So I do a very strong photography study. You can move to the next one. I collect plants and I create textures out of those plants. And all of these elements get digitized and scanned for me to create the digital pieces. You can move to the next one. My work, one of the things is that I've realized that my work needs to be at a very large scale so I can immerse the public and people into these landscapes that I missed and that I'm very conscious about their importance. And just kind of bring them, try to get the people in these urban areas to connect with other places around the world and kind of try to figure out a way of understanding how collectiveness can help the crisis in which we're living around the environment. You can go to the next one. So all of the work it's really large, and for me the idea is to be able to create a place where people can get close and appreciate the portraits of the lands that I'm doing as if they were immersed or were in them, and have that curiosity and that proximity and be able to explore it without feeling fearless or fearful about what is happening. You can go to the next one. Perpetual Flight is a project that I started in 2016. And I was walking down to my studio on a supposedly cold morning, but it was not cold. It was middle of January or February, and it was about 60 degrees outside. And it just just kind of shocked me. And I was also, every time that I would walk to my studio, I would see now there's less bags, but New York in the winter, the trees lose their leaves, and then those leaves get replaced by plastic bags. And in some cases, bottles that get like put on top of them, and and the grass just dries, and then you see all the garbage that is being thrown around the trees. And I wanted to call attention to the way that we relate to just the most basic connection to the land, which is the trees, the most basic elements around us in a city as New York or a city as Brooklyn. And one of those, so I started thinking of like, what if I replace these plastic bags with tropical birds? And you can go to the next one. So I created about 300 birds. And those are all birds that don't belong to New York. And, but somehow for me, they kind of flew here. What I love of this project, you can go to the next one. I did cutouts of the birds with MDF and then glue them. You can go to the next one. Glue them on both sides. So it was a very laborious work. Yeah, and then those are some of the birds drying. And then I head out to start installing them. Initially, I started on Flushing. You can go to the next one, Flushing Avenue along the Navy Yard. Finding places where the trees had grown out into the fences, and then they get cut. And for me, that was a very clear way of seeing how we can, like, trees can be allowed to grow, but it's basically humans who decide to cut them and just create this kind of impact. So for me, I was seeing trees, and I'm constantly seeing plants that are kind of trying to claim their place and grow around, and then there's somebody coming in and just cutting them. So I started to put the birds around those areas to call attention to these places. And it was kind of beautiful because at the beginning you're seeing the photo of the tree without the leaves, and then summer, spring will come, and then all of the leaves will come around, and then the trees will hide the birds. So if you go to the next one, you'll see them, and then it became these places where the birds were hanging. And throughout this project and the evolution of this project, it started as a conversation around climate change, and I always kept trying to think, like, how does this relate to immigration, to me being an immigrant? And what it's interesting is that with all of what happened this year and with the birds coming back to St. Anne's, it kind of made me realize that, like, it's not disconnected, that a lot of the problems and a lot of the massive exodus of people from their countries into other countries, of immigrants, let's say in the case of the United States, a lot of that is related to climate issues and is related to violence perpetrated in their countries, from the exploitation of their natural resources and of the wealth of their countries, and that everything's related. So for me, these birds have also become that larger metaphor of, like, even the impact that it's already happening in the countries from where people need to leave their homes and migrate to other places, immigrate to other places. And the birds also are losing their lands and have to, and I hear stories from my dad of how, like, there are more hummingbirds around his house and they need to make food because there's not, like, because the weather is changing so dramatically that birds and animals just are kind of losing some of the places where they're not normally find where they normally live, and then they kind of slowly move into our areas. You can move to the next one. Both these are different shots of the birds in different places. And I like calling out these places exactly where nature is just kind of bursting out and the plants are just kind of claiming their place. And then the last ones that I've done, I'm kind of in the end. I also love this photo because the bird just kind of landed there. And when I was trying to take the photo, the bird just kind of came after me. So it was interesting because a lot of people were thinking that my birds would be scaring birds from the trees. And this was like a very interesting to see. And it was this bird just coming and hanging out and um, just almost having another conversation with one of my birds. These are the birds at Senanes, and it was very exciting to be able to bring them and to be able to just kind of resurface them, especially at this time where we've all been kind of inside our homes. And I've been thinking so much about, I've been kind of going to a place that, like, to Colombia, to try to connect with my homeland, to connect with the lander, to connect with nature, to connect. And I started being like, how can I connect to my immediate surroundings? So I've been starting to trying to deepen my connection to what is around me. And I think that being able to bring the birds back out and remember that these birds are calling that attention into what's around us was very excited. I was in the process of this thinking again of like, how do I bring them back out? And here was St. Anne's. And it was also great to see again the changes of the weather and the birds just kind of going around with it. So yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Tatiana and Anne, for sharing your passion and interest in art. And I do have a few questions before we go to Q&A. Primarily about working in the pandemic. And for you, the pandemic is a part of the name of the series. And also, by the way, I love your backgrounds, both of your backgrounds, and how now, even though we don't see the artworks anymore, we can tell, which is really amazing. So I wonder, Anne, because you work with people, and how has it been different for you to work during the pandemic? And we know the story that you picked up the camera because of the pandemic and started working with the people you know because of the pandemic, because these were the people who were around, who were close enough. So how was it different for you to work with people you know?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for this opportunity, and I want to thank Hannah and FiveMyles. Well, I think the difference is that when you have friends and you're not really photographing them, it's different. And this is something that I did when I was many, many years ago. I photographed all my friends, and then I moved away from that. So I think that in photographing my friends, I became more rooted to my environment. Instead of going out every day, I was developing film, I was printing it, I was working in the house. And then when people came to visit, that was a big event during the lockdown, just to see someone else. And I have a big backyard, so we could socially distance. But these people visiting me, or people who are my friends that I saw, took on a much greater importance. And then especially my family and my husband and things like that. Even meals became more important. I used to be, yeah, you go out for dinner, but there was no place to go. So it really changed life, and that I wanted to know how other people felt. That's how I ended up.
Yeah, it's very interesting because you did tell me before that it was during your during your university years that you did exactly that. So in the pandemic, a lot of people picked up their old project, and you picked up your old way of working.
Yes, I did. Different size camera, but hey.
And with this project, especially since you photographed a lot of people of color and this pandemic surfaced a lot of racial inequalities. I mean, not the pandemic itself, but the murder of George Floyd. And it's a lot of pain and grief that a lot of people have been experiencing. And it is, they were saying that in the quotes that you read to us. So I'm sure that, or maybe a question, how did that, what role your photography had in that conversation?
Well, when I photograph, I think you have to go back, I have to go back to when I'm actually taking the picture. And even as I said in the being seen video or in statement, that taking a photograph, a portrait of someone is a collaborative event. I'm not a street photographer. I don't just walk up to someone and say, can I take your picture? And so all of this came back again because I'm talking to people I know. And, you know, oh, look that way. Oh, look that way. But I started to have more interest in light because I was working with just black and white. And I'm working with film, not digital technology. So the actual events around me of light, shade, time of day, how the person was, all became more important. I don't know if that answers it, but.
Well, it starts the conversation. I wish we had more time to continue it, but.
Oh, I just want to say this, that I wanted to know how people felt. I always want to know how people feel. I always want to know, because everyone has a story, and I feel that everyone wants to tell their story. That's it.
And Tatiana, for you, you do focus on, I mean, you do bring the ecosystem of Colombia to us here, people in New York who are just living very urban, gray lives. And you're a very social person. You told me that has been one of the things that you've been kind of missing during this pandemic. And so I wonder how it has been for you to create work during the pandemic, but also I know that the birds were created earlier and that you were just so excited that you have been thinking about putting them up somewhere, and then this opportunity came along. There has been much more birds and animals outside of our windows now that we're all in our homes, maybe less now, but so, and I know also that you changed your studio during the pandemic. So I wonder what has been happening kind of in your studio and in your work during this time.
So I think that it's interesting. I feel really grateful. The studio that I had previously, I was very isolated. I was always by myself. I had 2 studio mates, but they had very different schedules than me. I have an 11-year-old, and the 2 studio mates that joined me in the studio have 11-year-olds, the same as me. And and they are actually every day in the studio. So that's been incredibly, like, it's been like a source of like energy that I get from them because they're very active in their practices, and that has just kind of sort of like inspired me a lot. So I'm super thankful to have them. And then at the same time, I started a project. Like I think that it's been like a very interesting process, you know, because as I said, and when the pandemic started, I was ready to go to the Amazon to to do an artist residency and workshop, and that got canceled. And that was just kind of this source of frustration because I'm just kind of almost every year I go to Colombia for a long period or to a place that it's in the Amazon or in the rainforest to just kind of sort of like revitalizar. I don't have the word in English. Yes, yeah. My libraries, right? Um, and then I did a small workshop, and I ended up going and collecting dirt from my plants and creating this like series of textures out of dirt from my plants and ink drawings with using the stems from my plants. And that just kind of hit me, and I was like, okay, I need to figure out how to find my own sources here, um, and just how to work with what I have, and not thinking that I need to connect directly to where I'm at. And right now I have a mural that I placed at the Brooklyn ABR on Building 77. And that was a project in which I worked with the kids from the middle school where my son goes at, that is Community Roots, and there were 7th and 8th graders, where we did the steps of my process of going and photographing, because one of the things that I started doing was seeing all the plants that were growing just kind of widely. And a few things that I started learning is like one, some of those plants, not all of them, but there's a lot of native plants that are considered weeds, and the weeders come and take them off. And because of the pandemic, they haven't been upkeeping with the weed problem much. So I started seeing all these plants that I had never seen, which are plants that are not garden, with intention, or that are specific flowers that they felt really wild. But I also started seeing that a lot of those plants were bringing a lot of bees. So in the Navy Yard, I started seeing all this. There was a lot of goldenrods, that it's a native plant to New York, and then a lot of bees hanging around them, and bumblebees. And then I was seeing crickets in the Navy Yard, and the Navy Yard is very just industrial. And that just kind of, again, made me think like, we are the land in which we are, it's nature, like that concept. And like I always have to remind myself, being in the city, living in the city, we are part of nature, we are nature. It's like that there's that idea that we need to just continue to think that it's like we're not separated from nature. And the more that I get into my work, and the more that I read from different thinkers, and the more that I learn from um, uh, um, uh, um, indigenous, Amazonian indigenous from this country, indigenous people from different places, there is that idea that we're not separated from nature. And so I kept reminding myself, like, I don't need to go to Colombia to just get that contact with the land, and I need to start by doing here. So we did I did this project with the kids from Community Roots, with 7 kids, where we photographed all the plants that were going around and collect them and put them together. And I also just started to do a process with them of like trying to, I'm dyslexic, so I have no ability of learning complicated names, like the plant, the names that have been given by the scientific names for the plants. I will never retain them. But one of the things that I've enjoyed a lot is learning the native names, but also understanding how those native names to the plants have come through. And it's more of like how the person relates to the plant, what the plant reminds them, the description of the plant. So I also did an exercise with the kids of getting them to just kind of name the plants the way that they were seeing them. And that was really fun. So that just kind of thinking about that project and thinking about how I connect here has been a lot of what I'm kind of going through, still just wanting to be in Colombia and still missing what I have in Colombia, but understanding that this home that has been my home for the past 20 years, it's also a place where I can connect and with this idea, and that I need to continue to work with my work to try to connect other people to the land here, and just kind of leave aside this idea we're in a city.
Thank you. We ran out of time. Thank you for all the questions in the Q&A. We are going to address them afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Claudia, again, Hannah, and also to you, Tatiana and Anne. You remind me that the spirit of community lives through the artists who are among us, and so you've helped make so many great connections. You've certainly brought a sense of community and life to our neighbors by your work. And I'm so glad we got to collaborate and you got to collaborate with each other. And speaking of collaborations, I just want to be sure to thank my associate here, one of my colleagues, Lauren Bakoyan, who was so helpful in organizing the exhibition with FiveMyles and KODA, and also many members of the congregation who invested in the exhibit, invested in the artists, because they understood how important it is and continue to foster the arts as a way of maintaining our connection to the world around us. So thanks to them, thanks to all of you, and thanks to all of you who joined us today.
Tatiana, can you speak further about the cultural fusion of the imagery of birds, which are native to New York, and portray that environmentalist message for the city that can be considered to be hyper-urban without the cultural emphasis on environmentalism?
I'm not sure that I can necessarily like have an answer for that, because I haven't thought of them as not having a conversation around the environment, and with that conversation evolving further to like the cultural impact of immigration and that relationship between immigrants and environmental crisis around the world. It's hard for me to like place them outside of that. But I think that if I were to like kind of just put it as the simplest way, would be just that idea of the bird placing attention in the areas, in the green areas that are in the city, for us to focus on those areas and create that connection as a urban dweller. You know, it's like just more of that connection. If I strip them down and it's like just specifically, I think that the bird is serving as a visual reminder of what's next to you, as I feel that a lot of times we can just forget about what is surrounding us and just kind of be to focus in our phones, or just walk by a tree or walk by a plant and not even consider that it's there.
Yeah.
I think that, I don't know, do you think that answers, do you think that answers the question?
I think that's okay. We have two more questions. I'll combine them because they're both about the 1800s.
Okay.
And so there's a question about where did you find the botanicals from that time, and whether it impacted your palette, monochromatic, but also maybe the gold, and how you came to start using gold. So that's
Okay.
one part of the question on your palette, and then the other part of the question is about the relationship to land.
Okay, so the botanical drawings is a very important expedition that happens in the what is called El Nuevo Reino de Granada. I don't know what's the translation, but that was when Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador were part of the same country. And Jose Celestino Mutis, which is a priest sent by the Spanish crown, to basically just further investigate and catalog and categorize all the plant life and animal life of the New World. And I can remember how many drawings and cataloging of plants were made. And how I got my hands to it, my dad, when I started doing my pieces, I was working with things that I would find in, you know, the flea markets of birds and just kind of collaging. And then he, in Colombia, they were starting to release all the collection of all these plates that had been made, and he got his hands into them and then gave me a bunch of them. This collection is something that I would say that every Colombian knows about it, and somebody here and there has something, because it's like they've made a calendar, you know, or it's just kind of part of learning process in our schools. In terms of the influence on the color palette, yes and no, because all of these plates were colored, so they had colors. There were some that were black and white, but at the same time, because I didn't have enough plates from animals, I was looking into old engravings done by colonizers, and a lot of those, and I was working off of like a lot of royalty-free books. They have a lot of old, very ancient engravings that are, the artist is unknown. So I was searching a lot into that, and also just kind of creating a parallel into how we see these landscapes that were discovered, which they were never discovered. Like there were people there that lived, there were civilizations that were living in these places. They were discovered by Europeans, but that's it's a crazy word to use. And they were common. They were like, they look like magical. They're always portrayed as magical places, like with like little kind of people next to the trees, like everything is just kind of slightly distorted, from what probably we're seeing. And for me was this idea of how we are going to start seeing even photographs of like jaguars, of animals, in a way that we see dinosaurs, and we see these landscapes as something that existed, because it's it's the deforestation and the impact in the environment, especially in all the South American countries, and some and everywhere, but in South American countries, we'll see it in the past 2 years, what's happened to the Amazon, where it's just like massive hectares are just kind of like just burning in front of our eyes, and so there is a relationship there in terms of color, like thinking about black and white as something that represents like that, like the lack, the like death. But I'm very excited. But it also represented the sprayings of the coca plantations. So a lot of my work is because it's based on the stereotype of cocaine in Colombia. There's been a crazy impact in the land and in the environment through the Plan Colombia, which is the spraying of the coca plantations, patrocinado, how do you say that? Supported by the United States. And that spraying of the plants just creates a feel of gray over the rainforest. And the thing about coca is that it grows pretty much everywhere. Coca grows in the Amazon, it grows in the basing of the mountains, but it grows at higher altitudes. And one of the things that and I'm very excited. So I've been starting to learn more about coca, and it's a sacred plant. And and I just this week, like yesterday, I learned about one concept, and I from a woman, from a sociologist from Bolivia. Her name is Silvia Rivera now I'm gonna say wrong his name, Cusicanqui. And she talks about two things that explain that has given some kind of idea. So one that has kind of given more information around coca. So she talks about how which I had never heard this, but the word coca means plant, tree. So what she explains is that, I have it written down here because, okay, here we go. It's coca equals the plant world. It synthesizes the power of the message that the plants the message that the plants have for the human. And in the Andean tradition, it's used in every type of ritual. The leaf of the coca. So you would connect, like the leaf is used to connect to the land, with the plants, with the mountains, and that you always have to treat with respect that plant. So everything around cocaine disrespects the plant incredibly, and it's a plant that it's been connected with like Andean cultures for so long. And in that, what is very important too is that for indigenous people of Colombia, coca, it's also a way of exchanging knowledge. It's a way, so coca, it's a plant that is used to open up ways of communication, exchange knowledge, it's an incredible plant that has been totally distorted. So that is very important. And now the other thing that I learned, this woman talks about cheje, which is a Aymara word from Bolivia, and cheje is the description for gray, which I and this is kind of what just sort of like I'm starting to learn more about what that means, because that comes in terms of mestizaje, but it also describes, cheje describes exactly gray and all the tonalities in gray and the complexities of those tonalities in gray and all those complexities that are in between tensions, which in that case could be the tensions between black and white. So, and so what it's interesting is that I've always, my work has always been described as being black and white. And then the gold always represents the wealth of the knowledge, the wealth of the land, and the impact of the extractive economies into the land and into those ethnicities that have this great knowledge within the land. But what I want to say is that it was so kind of like this word have all of a sudden become so meaningful for me as somebody that it's always been racially in the middle, like where I can claim to be European, but I can't claim to be indigenous. And when I come to the States, I'm a woman of color, but if I go to Colombia, I'm not a woman of color. But also what I see in my work is that description of my work being black and white, my work is not black and white. Those are two colors within the range of colors. My work and what this woman Silvia says is that gray is it's always seen very negatively, right? But there is all these layers within gray. And for me, that just I see you smiling, Nadine, and you just don't know like the smile that I've been keeping for the past, because this woman was in the work of this woman was introduced by an Argentinian friend of mine last week. And as I started reading her, I was just like, she was just explaining so many things that I think that just makes so much sense with the work that I've been doing, that I think that it's been very instinctual, and very just kind of feeling. And I think that, the black, like the gray or the color, the gray palette that I use, it also is one of the things that just creates more conversations around why it's like it's the instigator of the conversations around the work. And if I were working in color, people wouldn't stop to ask, and then I wouldn't have the conversations. And because the work it's in a public and in the public, and it's meant to be for the public, and it's meant to be to have conversations, these tonalities of gray, all of this are very important, because it has all the layers that the work has, and all the layers that I think that all those complicated layers that me as this identity and this new identity that I have within the United States of a Latinx woman have, that it's incredibly, and in general about this huge umbrella of Latinx people in the United States, that it's an umbrella of a crazy diversity group that it's been very exciting. So I'm just starting to explore and understand this woman's work, understand further more, but I've been very excited because that gave me this, that I need to just kind of own the gray palette of my work and not the black and white, because black and white is like black and white, and in my work there's all the shades and a crazy amount of shades of gray and textures in between.
So can I add to that, gray? As a photographer, to me, it's all about form. Everything I showed was black and white. I'm just throwing that out to you. So for me, looking at the slides of your work, I didn't even think about the lack of color. And certainly not black and white. in fact, my response when you talked about it as black and white was, no, it's not. There's so many nuances in there. So keep going and think
Thank
about
you.
photography.
I had exactly the same feeling, and I laughed when you said it, because I completely get it, how you can also refer that to identity and being from in between. My father is black, my mother is white, and that would leave me gray, you know, by those standards. And it's interesting because before, when we were talking, when I was asking you a question, I said that your work brings so much life into this urban gray environment. And it's quite ironic, but your work has such depth in it that it doesn't seem just gray. You know, it just transports you to the place. Like it almost feels more green than gray. But I also am absolutely for what Anne is saying. Just embrace all that gray, and it's amazing that you found that woman who writes about it.
I have to. I will share with you. I'm trying to find her text in English. I can share with you some of the articles that I have found of her that are in English, because most of the texts that I've been finding, they're on. And there's one book that she has that they have in Amazon. And as I said, I'm starting to read. I'm dyslexic, so I'm super slow in this. But I've been like just devouring every single interview with her. Like I literally been like binging on her. Like it's almost like, and I'm like, I need to get in touch with, because she has a school in Bolivia to like teach people to connect with the land. It's just like the whole thing. I'm just like all the time. I'm like, I need to just somehow connect with her, and you know, and she started in the 70s. This is a woman that is my dad's age. She's been a long time out, but you know, it's for me, it's even crazy how little you know about other scholars and other people in other parts of the world once you just enter the United States. And
Would you also share with me?
yeah, totally.
Although
Yes.
I don't deal with black and white in quite I deal with it, but I deal with it from a personal place. But one thing, there's always a conversation about tonality with black and white. There's always, and these images behind me right there are film. So what the film does is extend the grays. Those same grays don't exist with digital technology. So I also, as a photographer, work with gray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now, thank you, Tatiana. And maybe just a few questions to you. Most of your photographs, most of your projects are black and white. There are a few, I think with the families you did both.
They're in color. They're mostly in color, yeah. They were street fairs. So people wanted to see themselves. People think of themselves as being in color. People don't think of themselves as black and white. And so I started that project when I was a teacher. And I taught elementary school. So I taught 4-year-olds up to 11 and 12-year-olds for 18 years. And during that time, I got the opportunity at my school to photograph the families, and diversity was a huge part of the school that I taught in. And so that once I did that family project, I then extended it. And for 5 years, I set myself up at street fairs, and I was a booth. And you walked along with your family, and there I was. And for like $5 or $10, I can't remember, I would take your picture and then print it out and give it to you. I had my sons at that time interview everyone. So I got all these details about diversity and family stories around diversity. And that's when I did one book. And then I think it was 2010, I got another grant from Brooklyn Arts Council to re-photograph these families. So it took a shift away from the diversity and toward that kind of history that we all love to look at about, oh, look at what I look, especially when it comes to memory and to look back. So that's the second book. And I was starting to photograph some of the families a third time. If you want to know how the pandemic hit, they didn't want to see me. So, but that project always was in color. That's my way of getting away from color.
Yeah. What was your decision behind making Being Seen in black and white?
Being Seen is in both, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Because when you shoot digitally, it's in color, and then it has to be, and then I change it, and I work really hard in Photoshop to make that picture look like it walked out of a darkroom. So I use a huge amount of layers and curves and levels and curves, and that all of that relates to working in a darkroom. But when I did the color, if I opened my closet, I could probably find one for you if you want to see it.
Well, now I remember. It's just that at FiveMyles and in the video, all of them were black and white. But
yes, they were. Yeah, I had one or two that were in an exhibition, but the color ones were mostly using color to add to the image. I photographed them in front of a painting. I have a whole series of women in front of this very bright colored painting. And then another woman that I did in color because her hair was bright pink. And then the rest of the area was the studio. So I used color, but in the end, and it's taken me 5 or 6 years to figure out that I seem to embrace black and white when it comes to photography. I seem to embrace all the form, and I think about design and line. I had a painting background. In fact, at some point, I was thinking about this, that I could never draw realistically. I don't know what it was at that time in my life. I can sort of draw now, but I couldn't. And I got lots of flack in art school. So I immediately latched onto photography as my tool as an artist. So when you're talking about hybrid this and that, I'm a photographer and I think like a photographer, but I don't go out. I make projects like an artist. So I find myself always in between in that way. And I look at my birds all the time.
Yeah. So there's a question from the audience. How has your work and how has your work with everyday individuals changed your perceptions of the world?
I think I said something to that effect, that the everyday individuals became more important when the pandemic hit, that we were so used to going. I mean, I may not live in the city now, but I come to the city. We're so used to being out and about. We're so used to going to a restaurant or a museum or a gallery and just walking in, not thinking about it. Suddenly everything was closed, first of all. And then, of course, we know later on you could go, but only if you planned. Like I went to the Botanic Garden and we couldn't get in because we didn't have tickets. So that kind of experience really shifted how I related to my family and to my friends. And so, as I said, back in my graduate school days, that was the focus of my work, to document everybody and everything around me. And that kind of left me for all these years, and I became interested in my social justice projects and my families. But this pandemic actually brought me back to that. And you know, little things that I think I had been taking for granted, like having a meal together.
Yeah, and just to state what Canon John also commented upon, it's your photographs are beautiful, and it's incredible how you make everybody look so beautiful, even with all the struggles that everybody has been going through. But it's beautiful that you know capture the moments and show kind of the it's a part of dreaming, I would say, because it's a photography, so it's not fully reality, right? But it's a little bit dreaming and seeing ourselves maybe outside of the pandemic, outside of the time, outside of hardship. Last question, and because especially Tatiana speaks a lot about relationship to the land, and with the, so I wonder whether that has been in your work, your research project with the pandemic diary, because people have been stuck in one place. And were there any conversations about their relationship to land, and maybe more in terms of sense of belonging?
Well, although this wasn't in a conversation, all of the pictures are outdoors. Some of them had to be taken in a more urban environment, but the camera didn't work indoors. I tried it. So my relationship to photographing changed. I no longer had the option of adjusting a camera and taking a photograph in a room like you're in. It didn't work. So I had to be outside. And I think we all became, you know, like we all became more entrenched in having conversations outside because that's the only way we could visit with people. So the first picture was my picture of Barrett, my husband. And we were sitting outside and I said, you know, I'm going to try this lens. I've had this lens, would you believe I've had this lens for almost 30 years and I never used it. I didn't say that in my statement because it was like, but and it's this little thing actually. This is the camera.
Yeah, we see it in one of the photographs, the reflection of it.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And then this is this little, it looks like Coke bottles, but they're lenses that perfectly fit on here. Whoops, I can't work with this, Kim. You'll edit out my perfectly work here. And that's something I never used before. So it was like brand new.
Yeah.
And it changes, but it didn't, the land itself became a part of the picture. It became the background, which I played with a lot. There were times the background was encroaching too much. So the land was in there for me. And I would invite people over to take their portrait as long as we could sit in the backyard. So I don't know if that has as much to do with it, but that I will now think about that, Claudia, because the land is so important to me personally.
It does make sense, but think also about the sense of belonging. I think that's a common thread for many of your photographs. I'd like to thank both of you for this wonderful conversation and for all your time